Okay, fantastic. Okay, so thank you all so much for sort of taking the time this evening, I guess, or early evening, to join us for this chocolate tasting. Again, hopefully you've got your chocolate in front of you, plenty of glasses of water as well. I would say maybe beer or wine as if you fancy, but I'm not too sure of the ages here. But again, thank you so much for joining. A little bit about what we're going to be doing over the next 60 minutes or sort of 90 minutes or so. So I'm going to introduce you to the wonderful world of craft chocolate. I'll be walking you through all the bars that you'll be tasting, explain a little bit about the science and the art of tasting chocolate. I'll also give a very quick crash course in the history of chocolate and also touch on what's happening today in the industry and almost give a case as to why it's so important to focus on craft. And please do use the chat function throughout. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves, make it as social as possible. If you do have any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat as well. I think that's the main thing. And if possible, do sort of show your cameras as well. It's always quite nice to see faces during the tasting, but that's absolutely no obligation to show your cameras there. Two very last final important points. There are 3 bars within your pack that will contain dairy. So you'll have the original beans Esmeralda's 42%. You'll also have the original beans Yuna 37%, which is the baby blue and the baby pink bar. And then I think you've also got a Menacao 45% milk within your pack. I think that's the bar that you have. We did have some sort of stock issues with Brexit, but you should have 1 Madagascan milk within your pack. And a final point, throughout the tasting, we are going to be using something called menti.com. So this will require you to have a second device with you. So hopefully you've all got your phone or a tablet with you. And if you go into your internet browser and type in menti.com, and it's going to ask you to type in a code. And the code is on the top of the screen, which is 85 59 11 9, and I'm also writing in the chat there. And the question is, when did you last eat some chocolate? This is absolutely anything with chocolate: biscuits, cakes, bars, absolutely anything. Ice cream. Was it earlier today, within the last week, within the last month? And I'm kind of hoping nobody really puts the last one, but not a problem if you do. Okay, this is a very good audience so far. A lot of you have already had chocolate, which is fantastic. It is better than average at the moment. Okay. Brilliant. Okay, so this is kind of, you are a slightly better than average audience. So about 80 to 85% of us, or rather Brits or us here in the UK, we eat chocolate once a week, every 3 to 4 days. But 25 to 30% of us eat chocolate every single day. Given that, what do you think we spend more money on as a nation? Published books, recorded music, or chocolate? Yeah, you're pretty much getting the point here. Yeah, so it is chocolate. We spend a lot of our money on chocolate. So compared to books where we're spending £3 billion, music, we're spending £2 billion. If you add those two together, that's how much we're spending on chocolate. But a lot of the chocolate that we are eating, that we're buying, that we're consuming, it really isn't that great. It's not great for the cocoa farmers. It's not great for the planet. It's not that great for us. And it's probably not that tasty if you were to really think about it. So the goal today is to explain to you why there is this craft chocolate revolution going on, and to show you that there is amazing chocolate out there that you can and should be having. And that, it's chocolate that not only tastes better, but it's better for you, better for the farmers, and better for the environment. But before we go ahead and do that, chocolate, we know it can be a little bit confusing. So we actually like to compare chocolate to coffee, because coffee is slightly more clearly defined, but everybody sort of gets coffee as well. So in the case of instant coffee, it's fine. It's usually referred to as not proper coffee, but you're going to get your caffeine hit. And somewhere down the line of its processing, that coffee beans were involved. If you want something a little bit better, made from freshly ground beans, then you've got your Starbucks, your Costas, your Pretz of the world. But if you want a really amazing cup of coffee, then you'll probably head to a local specialty coffee shop where the barista could probably tell you exactly where those beans are coming from, and they're sourcing coffee beans from all around the world, which are being grown carefully, harvested carefully, and roasted carefully. And these are 3 very clear distinctions. Now, in the case of chocolate, everybody sort of gets at this stuff on the left, dairy milks, Toblerones. It's pretty much the equivalent to instant coffee. That's fine. Everybody sort of gets that. But what most people don't realize, and what they think of as being great chocolate, it's actually a lot closer to your instant coffee. And these tend to be brands that are masquerading as a luxury, whether it's your Green and Blacks, your Hotel Chocolat, your Blint, whatever. You know, these are manufactured in exactly the same way as your bar of dairy milk is, but it's just got so much more fancy branding behind it. Whereas the really great stuff, this is being crafted directly from cocoa beans, where the chocolate maker can tell you exactly where those beans are coming from. And they just want to coax out all these incredible flavors from the cocoa. And this is the chocolate that you're going to be trying this evening. Okay, so as this is a chocolate tasting, we should probably start by trying some chocolate. So go ahead and grab this bar within your pack. It should be the yellow bar. It's the Pump Street 75%. Okay, so that one. Yeah, before we actually go ahead and taste it, I'm just going to very briefly introduce to you this idea of the art of savoring your chocolate. So you can kind of humor me here, but there is a little bit of logic behind it. So I'm pretty sure some of you may be familiar with the etiquette of a wine tasting. You know, you'll swirl the glass, check the legs, experience the nose. In chocolate, we've got something quite a bit similar. So actually go ahead and follow these steps with me. So go ahead, tear open your chocolate bar. And you should get this nice waft of aroma there. You know, bring it to your nose. Hopefully you should get some nice aromas there. Go ahead and pull the chocolate out and just admire it. Say hello to it. You know, your chocolate should be shiny. It should be one consistent color. There shouldn't be any streaks in there. Go ahead and listen to your chocolate as well. You know, bring it right up to your nose and sort of break it. Yep, Samuel, you're doing exactly the right thing. So go ahead and just snap the chocolate and you should get this nice crisp snap to it. Now, before any of you actually go ahead and try it, I don't know if any of you have put it in your mouth yet, but just wait a few seconds there. As we're all on camera, what I'm actually going to ask you to do is break off a small piece for yourself, but actually go ahead and hold your nose and put a piece of that chocolate on your tongue and suck it. But make sure you keep holding your nose. But please breathe through your mouth. Try not to suffocate yourself here, but make sure your nose is closed. Okay, and once you're sort of sucking the chocolate, you feel that it's melting, just think about what sensations you're getting. You know, maybe you'll think it's very smooth, maybe a little bitterness there, maybe quite a bit of sweetness, but I'm guessing you can't really detect too much. Once it's really started to melt and you can feel the chocolate melting all around the mouth, go ahead and release your nose and breathe in through your nose and through your mouth. And suddenly you should get this burst of flavor. You know, you should be hit by this wave of flavor and suddenly you should know exactly what that chocolate tastes like. So I won't spend too long here, but because I'm pretty sure most of you are quite aware of this, but there is a difference between taste and flavor. So taste, it's technically something that we get on our tongue. You know, it's a series of 4 to 5 sensations, including the sweet, sour, salty, bitter. And the 5th taste is also umami, which is that savory, meaty taste on the tongue. So with that chocolate on your tongue, maybe you got a little bit of sweetness there, maybe a bit of bitterness, but that's very different to what you're getting now, which is flavor. And flavor, it's actually something that we get through our sense of smell. Hence why I made you hold your nose then. So there are 2 ways in which we detect different flavors and aromas. So the first way is what's known as orthonasal. You know, it's through the nose. So go ahead, smell your piece of chocolate. You're going to pick up the aromas there. But how we detect the flavors in our food, that's what's known as retronasal olfaction. And retronasal olfaction, it just means smelling the unique here in that most animals, they can only detect flavor just through their sort of sniffing their food. And humans, we're rare and actually very fortunate here in that our mouths, they open up a pathway to our olfactory center, which is our sense of smell and different aromas. So this is why whenever you've got a cold or when you are holding your nose, you lose all of your sense of flavor. And these 2 pathways, they essentially work together. And sort of the amazing thing about good quality chocolate is that it's made with pure cocoa butter, or it should be made with pure cocoa butter. And cocoa butter, it's one of the few substances to melt at just below human body temperature. So as it melts, all the aromas and the volatiles, they suddenly start releasing all these different flavor compounds. Okay, so to demonstrate a little bit more about savoring, I'm actually now going to ask you just to go ahead and scoff your chocolate. Take a piece of it and just scoff it, you know, chew it really, really fast. We would never typically recommend doing that with sort of craft chocolate, but go ahead, just chew it, swallow it. Make sure it lasts no longer than 5 seconds in your mouth. Yep, so Will, go ahead and swallow it. Jasmine, go ahead, swallow. Okay. And as I think most of you done, just quickly jump back onto Menti and put whatever sensations came to mind as you sort of scoffed that chocolate. It'll even be as much as, you know, nothing much, you didn't get anything from it, kind of a waste of calories kind of thing. By the way, Menti, it's completely anonymous as well. We have no ideas what sort of people are saying. Little taste, yep, yep, just chocolate, fantastic. Empty, brilliant. Savage, okay. Yep, smoothish, yeah, brilliant. Okay, so the fundamental thing that you're getting here, you know, is the taste on the tongue, the bitter, the sweeter, multitasking. Yeah, so the fundamental thing here, it's the taste and it's also the textures as well. So what I'm going to do now is introduce to you this great wave of tasting chocolate, which I think I'm kind of hoping you've all got this within your pack. So it's the Hokusai wave. And we believe that to get the most out of your chocolate, you need to think of it being a little bit like a wave. So the first thing that you're going to get, it's the texture, the melt and the upfront. And I think most of you were getting that there. But I think for most of you, it just stopped there. Although somebody was picking up flavors here, so the berries and the fruity, that kind of suggested that the chocolate already started to melt in your mouth. So when you allow your chocolate to melt, you should then be able to ride up the wave and get this burst of flavor. And I think for some of you that did already happen. And this should happen anywhere between 5 to 15 seconds once that cocoa butter starts to melt. And we've put a bunch of different tasting descriptors there, but you know, by no means is the list exhaustive. There are so many different words to use when it comes to describing chocolate. So just feel free to sort of use that as almost a form of inspiration. And then similar with maybe, you know, a nice glass of wine or any specialty food, it's all about the aftertaste, all about the long lingering sort of finishing notes there. So just throughout the tasting, feel free to use this wave. We put a bunch of different words there. So using Menti and the wave, it's a great way to really think about what it is that we're experiencing, because we often find that when we're tasting new foods or when we're describing food and drink, the words can quite literally be on the tip of our tongue, but we're not brilliant with the words there. However, I think you're going to be a pretty good audience because you're very good at articulating what you're sort of experiencing there. Okay, so now with all of this in mind, take another piece of your Pump Street chocolate and now just savor it. Let it melt and just use Menti, put whatever flavor descriptions come to mind. Feel free to use the wave or just use your imagination. As you're trying that chocolate, I will very quickly introduce the bar to you. So this chocolate bar, it's crafted over in Orford in Suffolk by a guy named Chris Brennan and his daughter Joanna, which you can see the pair here. And they've crafted this bar from amazing beans grown in Jamaica. And in particular, it's the Bachelor's Hall estate. So this is a single estate chocolate bar, as you can sort of see on the front packaging there. And Chris Brennan, the founder of Pump Street, originally he worked with IBM. He got a bunch of different patents behind his name. He then went to go make video games in Canada. He then got bored of that in his late 50s and decided to come to the UK and introduce Suffolk to sourdough bread. So he set up something called Pump Street Bakery. A couple years later, he and his daughter, they then wanted to introduce Suffolk and the UK to bean to bar chocolate. So they started controlling every step of the chocolate making process. And very few people were doing that at the time. It tastes like chocolate. Yep, you know, even the word chocolatey is a great word to describe this chocolate. But I can't quite see any, yeah, smooth, yep. But hopefully just notice that when you allow it to melt, bitter but not bitter. Okay, very interesting. Maybe it's more quite intense there. But yeah, hopefully just notice the metallic. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, hopefully it just gets that little bit more nuanced when you savor your chocolate. Okay, and you probably think, you know, you wouldn't quite get this, yeah, the berry, the fruity, yeah. So you wouldn't quite get this same level of flavor complexity from a bar of dairy milk or from a Bourneville or, you know, even a bar of Lindt. You wouldn't get the same flavor complexity there. But what's the difference? You know, what's the difference between this bar of Pump Street and a bar of Lindt, let's say? So in short, it's all about how your chocolate is made and what it's made from. So I think most of you, definitely all of you, you know, you can tell the difference between a roast chicken and chicken nuggets, right? So we typically see craft chocolate being much more like a roast chicken and cheap mass-produced chocolate being much more like a chicken nugget. So your best bet when you look at a chocolate bar, it is to read the label, you know, look at the ingredients. So this is what you'll often find in a mass-produced chocolate bar. You know, sugar tends to be very high up in the ingredients list, and sugar is a very addictive substance. You know, it shouldn't be the first ingredient in your chocolate. You then get the palm oil, the vegetable oils, and these tend to be the oils that replace the cocoa butter within chocolate. So cocoa butter, that's the very expensive ingredient in the cosmetic industry as well. So a lot of big chocolate manufacturers, they will just sell off their cocoa butter to the cosmetic industry and replace it with cheaper, vegetable fats, palm oils, and different stuff like that. And this is a very long list of ingredients as well, sort of the E numbers, artificial flavorings, food colorings. This doesn't need to be in your chocolate. Whereas with craft chocolate, the mantra really is less is more. So, take your bar of Pump Street, turn it over, look at the ingredients. It's just 3 simple ingredients there. The reason I'm suggesting the Pump Street is because that's the one that's written in English, but you've got the cocoa beans, cane sugar, organic cocoa butter. Cocoa should always ideally be the first ingredient within your chocolate, whether it's a milk chocolate, dark chocolate, or white chocolate. Cocoa should be the first ingredient there. So when reading the label, always look at the ingredients. Remember that less is more, and cocoa should, be the first ingredient. Also, always look for details of the farmer, the cooperative, or the estate. This is a slightly more challenging one when it comes to sort of sourcing the location of the cocoa. But sort of hat tip to Pump Street for putting details of the cooperative or where that cocoa is coming from, or the estate of where that cocoa is coming from. Because often in supermarkets, you'll be able to find sort of single origin chocolate like this. You can't quite see what I'm holding up, but this is a single origin chocolate, 72% from Ecuador. It's from quite a big chain here in the UK. And this is pretty misleading. So buying a bar like this, a bar of single origin chocolate from a supermarket, that's a little bit like buying a bottle of wine that just says French wine on it. That doesn't quite cut it when it comes to wine. So when you buy a bar like this, single origin chocolate, that doesn't guarantee the traceability of where that cocoa is coming from. Mass-produced chocolate, it really is out there to confuse us. So don't be fooled by fancy packaging, buzzwords, marketing terms. If the details of the cooperative, the farmer, the estate, if they're not on your chocolate bar, it's worth doing a little bit of research there. So chocolate makers, they should be incredibly transparent about where they're sourcing their cocoa from. If a chocolate brand or a maker cannot tell you where that cocoa is coming from, you can be super skeptical there. So it's definitely worth doing the research there. It is a little bit of extra work, but that's essentially why we exist at Cocoa Runners. We stock over 1,000 different chocolate bars, but we never stock a bar unless we know exactly where that cocoa is coming from. So, always look for details of that. And thirdly, always look at where your chocolate bar is being produced as well. Mass-produced chocolate, it really won't tell you where it's actually being made or who's producing it. And even Belgium chocolate does not mean that it was made in Belgium. So one quick aside here, going forward, if you ever see the words Belgium chocolate on your packet of biscuits, on a chocolate bar, and a tub of ice cream that says made with the finest Belgian chocolate, just think twice. So a quick show of hands here. Who here would have thought that Belgium chocolate is some of the world's best chocolate? The Belgians are fantastic at making chocolate. Yep. I think we tend to see most hands going up here, but it is a very common misconception. But by the way, is anybody from Belgium here before I sort of put my foot in it? No. Okay, so this is nothing about Belgians per se, but it's just, about Belgium chocolate. So there's this bizarre thing in the UK, all around Europe, in the US, quite literally all around the world, where we think that Belgium is great for chocolate. But what really kickstarted this was that in the 1960s, the Campbell Soup Company, they did a deal with Godiva, which is now quite a well-known Belgian chocolatier, to sell Godiva in the States. But the only way that they could come up with some decent marketing was by saying, it's Belgium, therefore it's good. But the Belgians, they really don't have any interesting history of making chocolate. And even today, they've got a much rougher and darker history of sourcing their cocoa. And Belgian chocolate is actually one of the world's mass-produced chocolates out there. It's sourcing all of its bulk commodity cocoa from West Africa. And, so using Belgian chocolate on your chocolate bar or packet of biscuits and trying to sell that as a luxury, it's almost quite scandalous, but it is just very misleading as well. And to top it off, even by saying that it's Belgian chocolate does not mean that it was made there. So there's no legal requirements to only call chocolate Belgium if it's made in Belgium. So, always look at where your chocolate bar is actually being produced. But please, going forward, treat Belgian chocolate as a warning sign. They don't win any awards for making their chocolate, and it's so much more important to know where your cocoa is coming from. Okay, fantastic. So a quick one for you. Does anybody know how chocolate grows or what chocolate grows on? This one is a quick one for Menti. Tree, yep, fantastic. Plants, okay, yep. So tree is very spot on there. Tree, yep, excellent. More people, cacao tree, yep, brilliant. Okay, so, oh, did someone say pod? Cocoa tree, in pods, yeah, spot on. Okay, so the ground like potatoes. Okay, no, so the cocoa, chocolate essentially grows on as a cocoa pod, and it grows on the cocoa tree. And before we do that, I'm just going to ask you to very quickly try these two original beans chocolates. So I think you've got the taster bar pack. So it'll be the Porcelana, the Pura 75% and the Virunga 70%. Should be two, the pink bar and the purple bar like this. Some of you may have the larger bar as well. Okay, so go ahead, try those two side by side. Just go ahead, try those two side by side. As you do that, I will very sort of quickly go back to this. So chocolate, I'm pretty sure most of you have heard that chocolate comes from fruit tree. So chocolate, it's made from cocoa beans. These beans, they grow within a pod that grows on the cocoa tree. Cocoa trees, they grow roughly 20 degrees above and below the equator. And it's very Dr. Seuss-like in the way that it grows. So if you think about these big, bright colored, vibrant pods just growing up the trunk of the tree, and they're about the size of a rugby ball. So during harvest, the cocoa farmers, they'll then cut open the pods with a machete-like knife, split it open, and then inside it's about 25 to 50 cocoa seeds, which are covered in this white pulp. As you can kind of see in the second picture there. That white pulp, it's incredibly sweet, it's so delicious. It's almost like lychee, very tropical. But the cocoa seeds themselves, they're extremely bitter. They've got no real flavor and certainly nothing that resembles chocolate. Okay, so hopefully you've tried those two chocolates side by side. And did you notice that they tasted quite a bit different from one another? Did they taste different at all? Yep, a couple of nods. Okay, brilliant. So there's a couple of reasons as to why that is. So the first step that impacts flavor, it's down to the type of cocoa that grows and where that cocoa is grown. So if you think about it a little bit like wine, most of us recognize that different grape varieties will taste different. So, a Malbec is different from Merlot, from a Tempranillo. But we also recognize that where those grapes have grown will taste radically different. So, French Merlot will taste very different from a South African Merlot. And that makes sense. But the same, it can actually be said for chocolate. It's all about the genetics of the bean and all about the terroir, the land, the region. So that pure 75% that you tried, that sort of pink bar there, that the cocoa, it's grown in Peru, and the bean type is known as the Porcelana. Whereas that Virunga that you tried, the 70%, the purple bar, that cocoa, it's grown in the Congo, and the bean type is known as the R. melanado. You don't need to know those two different bean types, but it's just to demonstrate two different bean types grown in two different regions of the world. Now, the next step that massively affects the flavor and is so crucial to chocolate's flavor is the fermentation. So many amazing foods require a fermentation. Bread, wine, beer, cheese, yogurt, chocolate. And with chocolate, the fermentation, it's all about the different yeasts and bacteria in the air that start reacting with the sugars in that white pulp. So as I said before, that white pulp, it's incredibly sweet. It's got a very high sugar content. And during this stage of fermentation, the seeds, they get very hot. The heat that's generated, that's essentially needed to kill the cocoa bean and prevent it from germinating. So the cocoa seed, it effectively dies and becomes a cocoa bean. And fermentation, this is the crucial step in developing the flavor of your chocolate. If you were to ever try a raw cocoa bean, it would have no flavor at all, and certainly it wouldn't taste anything like chocolate. And for chocolate to even get its chocolatey flavor, that requires a fermentation. Okay, and then once your cocoa beans have been fermented, the white pulp eventually drains away. The next stage is then the drying. Cocoa beans, they need to be dried. Okay, so back to these two chocolate bars that you just tried. They were crafted by a chocolate maker called Original Beans, which was set up in the early 2000s by a guy named Philip Kaufman. And Philip, he was originally in the WWF, that's the Wildlife Fund. And he got into chocolate because he realized that was the best way in helping local indigenous tribes preserve the rainforest. So Philip, he's an amazing chocolate maker, sourcing his cocoa from very rare places around the world, but he's foremost a conservationist there. So with this particular chocolate bar, the cocoa is coming from the Pura Valley. Go ahead and use Menti, give it another taste and just put whatever tasting notes come to mind as you try it. Acidic, yep, spot on. Dry. The dry is interesting. Intense, yep. Fruity, yep. Sour, okay, brilliant. So I really like the fruity, the sour, the acidic, yep. So that really is the fascinating thing about this particular bean, the Pura Porcelana. it really does have this very citrusy, pristine, sour note to it, which quite a few of you are picking up there. And the porcelana, this particular cocoa bean, it's amongst the rarest and most expensive types of cocoa that grow all around the world. And the reason why it's so rare and why it's so expensive is because this particular bean, it's a white cocoa bean. So typically cocoa beans tend to be brown or purple, but this bean is actually white in its raw state. And it was thought to have been extinct, but it was rediscovered about 10 or so years ago. Okay, brilliant. So moving away from the northern border of Peru, we're now going to switch over to the Congo and go ahead and try this Virunga 70% again. And this is the idea of sort of comparing and contrasting the terroir and the beans in chocolate. So just jump back onto Menti and again, put whatever tasty notes come to mind as you try it. And this cocoa for this particular bar, it's coming from the Virunga National Park or the Virunga National Rainforest in the Congo. And this is Africa's most biodiverse protected areas. And it exists to protect a third of the world's wild mountain gorillas. So yeah, creamy, butter. And the bigger the word is getting, it just means more people are putting it out there. Warm, I like that. I like that word. Smooth, yep. Excellent. Less sweet. That's interesting because this particular bar, it has a little bit more sugar added to it. So percentage in chocolate just refers to how much cocoa is in there. So 75% cocoa, 25% sugar. So this particular bar that you're trying, the 70%, that does technically have more sugar in there. So it's interesting that you find it less sweet. But yeah, so this is definitely more classic in chocolate style, whereas the other one is super acidic, very fruity like. And just sort of for my own curiosity, which of the two did you prefer? Did you prefer that Pura, 75%, or did you prefer that Virunga? We always find there's a clear winner, but this one seems pretty even actually. Okay, super. Okay, the Virunga looks like it's winning. If you do happen to have any chocolates, left over, maybe try it again tomorrow morning and just see if your preference changes there, or try it after dinner or whatnot. Okay, brilliant. So carry on eating those first 3 chocolates. I'm now going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of the history of chocolate. We're going to taste more chocolates as we go through that. But more importantly, there's a very quick quiz at the end. So whoever gets top marks, we do have a chocolate prize for you. So it's worth keeping an ear out for any sort of interesting clues. So chocolate's history, it is pretty wacky. We can date people drinking chocolate to about 5,000 years ago. And the white pulp of the cocoa pod, it would ferment into this boozy drink. It was about as strong as beer. And once fermented, it would leave behind these cocoa beans. And the Mayans and the Aztecs, they would take these cocoa beans, grind it up with a pestle and mortar, and mix it with water. And they would add things like spices, chilies, honey, vanilla, to form a drink. And when Christopher Columbus and his crew, when they arrived in the New World, they saw that the Aztecs were highly regarding the cocoa bean. It was so important to them that it was used as a form of currency. And the Spanish conquistadors, they left records behind to say that, for example, 100 cocoa beans could buy you a canoe filled with fresh water. And the Aztecs and the Mayans, the Olmecs, to them, cocoa was incredibly valuable. It was worth more than its weight in gold, and they would drink their cocoa for all sorts of different religious ceremonies. So, for example, once a year, they would take a young male warrior, recognized for his good looks, and they would then sort of fatten him up with drinking chocolate throughout the whole year. And once the year was up, they would then sacrifice him to the gods in the temple. But the important thing there is, cocoa was very much something that was drunk. When cocoa comes to Europe, sort of courtesy of the Spanish conquistadors, it's still a drink. But cocoa, it was drunk as a medicine to treat illnesses such as sort of abdominal pain, because cocoa, it had this bitterness. However, when somebody decided to sweeten cocoa with a little bit of sugar or with honey, drinking chocolate quickly became a popular delicacy in the Spanish royal courts. So cocoa, it then became the go-to drink for the aristocracy. So by now, chocolate has become the upmarket thing to consume. So even in Great Britain, some of you may have heard sort of having coffee houses during the 17th century, but during this time, we were also getting chocolate houses or cocoa houses. So Lloyd's of London, it wasn't just a coffee house, but it was also a chocolate house too. And cocoa, it really became the go-to drink to enjoy and to socialize with. However, this very fashionable drink, the main ingredient was cocoa. And cocoa was very difficult and time consuming to produce on a mass scale in South America. It was very manual, laborious work. Then it was the Dutch, the English, the French. They began spreading cocoa plantations all across these colonized countries in South America and sort of soon the West African islands. And the work on these cocoa plantations, they were given to poor wage and slave laborers. However, for the Europeans, the big problem when drinking chocolate, it's very simple to explain if you have a beard. I actually think I see some beards here. So if you have a beard here, this may be of relevance to you, but it probably really won't be. But the fundamental thing about the cocoa bean is that the composition of it, it's about 50% cocoa butter, which is the fat, and 50% cocoa powder, which is the brown stuff that makes chocolate brown. And that cocoa butter, that fat, much like oil, it really doesn't mix well with any form of liquid. So if you had a beard and you were drinking your chocolate in a cold climate, in which the Dutch, the English, the Europeans were doing very often, you had this huge problem, and the cocoa butter would just congeal in the beard. And this put a lot of gentlemen off from drinking their chocolate. But then along came a couple of Dutchmen, the Van Houtens, father and son, and they invent this device called the cocoa press, which is in the fourth picture there. And the secret of this cocoa press is that you can press out a lot of the cocoa butter from the bean simply with heavy machinery. So you would press your cocoa, it would separate out into cocoa butter and cocoa powder. So they would then just use that cocoa powder for mixing with their drinks. However, the Dutch missed a trick here, and the real genius would be the Brits. In particular, it's a guy named Joseph Fry, who discovered slightly counterintuitively that if you add some of that cocoa butter back into the paste that people were originally making their drinks with, you could stabilize it and create a chocolate bar. And this was done by Fry's in 1847. So Fry's over in Bristol, they made the very first chocolate bar that we have records of or that we're aware of. However, these chocolate bars, they would have had a radically different texture to chocolate as we know it today. So if you want to go ahead and try the Taza bar within your pack, it should be around just like this. You'll either have a brown one or a red one. So go ahead, try a piece of this and just see what I mean by chocolate having this radically different texture back in the day. By the way, this bar that you're trying, it's not made in 1847, but it's made today in a very similar style. Oh yeah, and one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning is I really cannot guarantee you're going to like all of the chocolates. I hope you enjoy most, if not all, but we love chucking in challenging bars just to show how different chocolate can be. And this is probably one of the more divisive bars. You either really love the texture or you really hate it. So just feel free to use the chat or sort of thumbs up, thumbs down if you like that chocolate bar at all. We find it tends to be very 50-50. Samuel, are you a fan or not so much?
It's very confusing. I like the flavor, but then I also am not sure if I do.
Yeah, do you have the cinnamon one or is it the plain? Is it red or
it's
brown? Brown. Okay, excellent. Okay, so actually this particular Taza bar, it's crafted in Massachusetts in the States, and it is a great demonstration of the grinding process in chocolate. So this Taza bar, it's a stone ground chocolate. It's got a quick grind, it's got a much larger particle size. So essentially all chocolate will start like this Taza bar, much like how the Fry's bar did. But nearly every single other chocolate maker will continue grinding and refining their chocolate to get it a lot smoother. So, if you think about, a bar of Lindt or whatever, it will start like this Taza bar, but the chocolate makers, they will continue grinding it to get it a lot smoother there. But essentially, that was the texture that everybody was getting used to for about 50 years after Fry's made that first bar. The next thing that happens in chocolate, it's about 40 to 50 years later, and is by a guy named Rudolf Lindt, the famous Swiss chocolatier. And Rudolf Lindt, he left his grinder on overnight. Again, the grinder, that's what turns your beans into a paste to make your chocolate. And Rudolf Lindt, he left his grinder on overnight and discovered two things. Firstly, your chocolate becomes very smooth, which is pretty obvious. But the second thing is something called conching. And maybe if you've had a bar of Lindt recently, you may have seen on the back that it talks about conching. And by conching, we mean aerating the chocolate. And by aerating the chocolate, it's a little bit like when you're kneading bread. You're introducing a lot more oxygen into that, and that releases a lot more of the flavor compounds. So that Taza bar, if you had the plain cacao puro bar, that brown bar, you may have noticed that it didn't have the same flavor depth or complexity as those first 3 chocolate bars that you had. And that's sort of the reason being those first 3 bars that you tried, they have been further refined and also conched, and you were able to pick up all the different flavors there. So that's sort of what conching does. It sort of reveals all these different flavors of the cocoa. Almost at the same time that the conch is developed, there's another critical invention by the Swiss in chocolate. So the Swiss in chocolate's history have been pretty amazing, you know, unlike the Belgians. But this is down to a guy named, a Swiss man named Daniel Peter, who was working alongside Nestle, and they formulated the first milk chocolate recipe. Now, the introduction of milk chocolate, it completely changes the game in the chocolate world. You know, milk chocolate, it is a completely different ballgame to dark chocolate, right? So actually, at this point, go ahead and try your, I think you've got the Menacao 45% milk. Go ahead and try one of your milk chocolate bars. Oh no, do you have maybe a Pump Street bar? A pink Pump Street bar? Yep, that's the one. Terrence, yep. Sorry, yeah, it will be the pink Pump Street bar. I think it's a 58%. Go ahead and just try a piece of that chocolate.
Is it this one?
No, Samuel, do you may have this one? I'm so sorry. We had like some stock. Yeah, with the woman on it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you've either got the Menacao 45% milk with the woman on it, or you'll have a Pump Street 58% milk.
Oh, we have a 63% Mexico.
Okay. Do you have this one, the 45% as well?
No, just we have a milk 40%. We have a milk 40%.
Yeah, go ahead and try that. Yeah, that's the one. Sorry about that. Yep, that's the one. So that's that's crafted in Amsterdam. Yep, go ahead, try a piece of that. And you know, just see what I mean by chocolate. You know, milk chocolate is something completely different. You know, milk chocolate is something that's very hard to stop eating and often just considered to be a sweet treat. So chocolate, it's now become a product that everybody is familiar with. You know, once it was what the aristocrats were drinking in the royal courts, or what the Aztecs were using as a form of currency. But now everybody is familiar with it, and it's become associated with all sorts of different things. You know, everything from sex to romance to maybe what girls want after a breakup. You know, chocolate really has become this marketing delight. But at the same time, it's also become a product that you're just going to get out of a vending machine, or is sort of at the supermarket checkout aisles. You know, it's an impulse purchase. Chocolate is pretty much a pick-me-up, something sweet, something cheap, filled with lots of other ingredients, lots of fillers, you know, very little focus on the cocoa itself. And whilst this might seem okay and pretty harmless, it is becoming a real problem for 2 reasons. So the first reason being, we're losing all the full potential of chocolate. Chocolate has basically become a commodity. We're sort of all about consistent flavor and the lowest possible prices. And ultimately, chocolate is just becoming this vector for other flavors. So if you think about it, chocolate has this amazing ability at showcasing other flavors, whether it's a sea salted caramel, or chocolate and nuts, chocolate and whatever. I'm pretty sure all of you here have your favorite chocolate and something combinations. You know, one very classic product that we have is the Terry's Chocolate Orange, produced in 1931. You know, it really is a classic here. But even here, orange is the flavor that you're focusing on. You don't really care too much about the chocolate or where that cocoa is coming from. And even Terry's, they pride themselves on saying made with real orange oil. You know, there's no focus on the cocoa there whatsoever. Now, we think this is a real shame, as just like with wine, has so many different flavors depending on the variety. And, you know, I'm pretty sure you're all aware of the different wine varieties and the sort of the terroir and different vintages there. We know that chocolate can offer so much more. Even here, I don't know if you can read it too well, but it says chocolate has over 400 distinct flavor compounds. That's even more than a fine wine. And that's true. That's pretty remarkable. But that's what we're losing when we treat chocolate like a commodity. Now, the second reason as to why cheap chocolate is a problem is a lot more important, actually. So ultimately, as consumers, we're pretty much driven by cheap prices, you know, quick thrills for a bar of chocolate. We only know to spend no more than £2 on a bar of chocolate. And the big chocolate industry, it's dominated by a very small number of huge conglomerates, all trying to source their cocoa for as cheap as possible. And they get away with paying the least amount possible for their cocoa. And the cocoa of what you'll find in a mass-produced chocolate bar, whether it's a bar of Bournville or a bar, you know, a Kit Kat or a Lindt, that is a commodity. And as a commodity, it makes it very hard for a producer to capture any of that value. So looking at West Africa, where 70% of the world's cocoa is grown, there are very few buyers of cocoa in West Africa, sort of huge conglomerates essentially controlling the prices of cocoa. Yet there are hundreds of thousands of smallholder farmers in West Africa producing this cocoa. And due to this imbalance of so few buyers, yet hundreds of thousands of farmers, for as long as we are consuming or demanding cheap chocolate, there will always be these price pressures on the cocoa farmers. And this is hitting some of the world's poorest people. And when these cocoa farmers, when they're being forced into poverty and the price of their crop is low and they own very little land, their only option is to sort of increase their yield, is to cut down the rainforest. And these cocoa farmers who are growing cheap commodity cocoa, who own very little land, they're desperate to grow more cocoa. So if you were to go back to sort of 1940s, Ivory Coast and Ghana, they were 70% virgin rainforest. You know, cocoa wasn't growing there. Cocoa was coming from South America. By the 1990s, where the cocoa trade really starts to kick off, the rainforest goes to below 30%. Then it sort of goes to, below 10%. Now it's anywhere between 1% and 3%. This is a tragedy because these are all protected forests. But the reason it's been happening is because of illegal deforestation. These cocoa farmers, they're desperate to grow more cocoa for mass-produced chocolate. It's such a short-term solution. This really is not sustainable for sort of mass-produced chocolate. Now, the really difficult part about mass-produced cheap commodity chocolate is that the average cocoa farmer in West Africa gets paid less than $1 a day. Even here, less than 80 cents a day. And this is where most of the world's cocoa is coming from. And in Africa, realistically, you would need anywhere between $2 to $3 a day to keep your family alive, to keep your family fed, to send your children to school. But without the means to hire workers on their farms, these cocoa farmers, they regularly recruit minors on their farms, young children on their farms, to pick the cocoa, to harvest it, to transport it around the farms. And as a consequence, lots of studies have shown that anywhere between 2 to 3 million children are basically unable to go to school, and they are working these incredibly labor-intensive jobs on cocoa farms. And these jobs on cocoa farms, they're incredibly dangerous, with a machete-like knife, cutting open the pods. And cocoa is not a light crop either. It's very heavy, very dense. Even worse than this is the problem of child slave labor. And this has been known about for the last 20 to 30 years, and it was sort of exposed within the BBC in the early 2000s. And all of the big chocolate manufacturers and the cocoa buyers, they offer very impressive sort of proposals, such as we won't be using any child slave labor in our chocolate production by the year 2025. But these deadlines, they're always being extended. A couple of years ago, the deadline was the year 2020, essentially last year. But in 2017, it got pushed out into the year 2025. And these are completely unmeetable. And these are very large corporations, as you could probably imagine, in the chocolate industry. And they accept that there are at least 2 million children working in these cocoa farms in West Africa. And, there are sometimes even reports of there being up to 5 million children working on these farms in West Africa. So they all know that this is a problem. And they all know that child slave labor, it's being used in their supply chains. Nestle know this, Cadbury know it, Lindt know it, Hershey know it, Callebaut knows it. Callebaut is sort of one of the bigger sort of Belgian cocoa buyers and chocolate producers. And they spend a lot of money trying to come up with a solution, but their only solution is to try and wish Africa out of poverty somehow. So despite child slave labor and deforestation, there's no acknowledgement that these cocoa farmers, that they actually need to be paid properly. And as I said, huge cocoa buyers and sort of the big chocolate manufacturers, their only solution is to try and wish Africa out of poverty somehow. That's not a real solution. One solution, I don't want to preach too much, but it is essentially what you're trying this evening. It's craft chocolate. Knowing where your beans are coming from, knowing who's farming your cocoa, having the guarantee that your chocolate maker is paying its farmers properly. So on the screen here on the left, this is a graph published by Original Beans. And at this point, go back to your Original Beans chocolate, just get a nice sweet taste of it. So that hot pink line, I don't know if you can see it too well, but the bottom one, that's the international cacao price. It's fluctuating. It's a commodity. It fluctuates year on year, day by day, hour by hour. Above that, you've got the organic and fair trade premium. That's a premium above the commodity rate. We often get asked about fair trade chocolate because actually a lot of the chocolate that we sell on our website, it's not fair trade certified. And fair trade, in terms of mass-produced chocolate, it's marginally better than no fair trade in terms of mass-produced chocolate. But, just look at what the craft chocolate makers are paying for its cocoa. That top purple line there, that's what Original Beans is paying for its cocoa. So it's 4 to 9 times above the organic and fair trade premium, but most importantly, it stays consistent despite those fluctuating prices. And that makes a massive difference. So the craft chocolate movement, it stands for things like direct trade, transparent trade, paying premium fair prices to the farmers, and ultimately encouraging for them to sort of farm more sustainable cocoa. So, you know, with a mass-produced chocolate bar, you can spend £1 or £6 or up to £10. The more you spend or the more luxurious it looks, that doesn't mean the farmer's getting any better of a deal. You know, price nor packaging, unfortunately, it's not a good indication. You know, buy a bar of Lindt, buy a bar of Cadbury's, the farmer's going to get the same. It's probably about 74 pence a day. However, if you spend your money more wisely, that can make a massive difference. You know, buy a bar of craft chocolate, which is all about treating the farmers fairly and giving back to the farmers. The farmer's daily income can be 2 to 3 times as much. Plus, they get the housing, the education, electricity, and the enrichment. That makes a massive difference. So for as long as we are treating chocolate as a commodity or not caring where the beans are coming from, there will always be these price pressures on the cocoa farmers. And supply chains in big chocolate, they're deliberately set up in such an opaque way that you genuinely never know where the beans in your bars are coming from or how many middlemen were involved to produce that chocolate bar. So that's sort of why we're so emphatic about knowing exactly where our cocoa beans are coming from. We're desperate to know that because that's the best way of ensuring what you're consuming, what you're buying, isn't a product of deforestation or child slave labor there. So chocolate, so much more than just a commodity. You know, you can spend a couple pounds more for a product that not only tastes better, but is better for you, better for the environment, better for the planet, and foremost is better for the cocoa farmers. Okay, excellent. Sorry, I'm conscious I did a lot of talking there. So back to the beauty of well-made chocolate. So go ahead and try this chocolate bar, Menekau Salt and Nibs. This one is crafted by, it's actually crafted in Madagascar. So there are very few chocolate makers actually crafting at origin, but we are sort of seeing more and more chocolate makers popping up where the cocoa is growing. And as you're trying this particular bar, so the cocoa, it's being sourced locally. So much of the value of this particular chocolate bar, it's staying at origin there. Okay, and as you're trying it, again, feel free to use Menti, just put whatever flavors, textures, or tastes come to mind as you try it. Wild, aromatic, very nice. Nutty. Yeah, the not bitter there, that might be helped by the salt as well. Salt tends to liven up the palate. Syrupy, okay. Typically, we find Madagascan chocolate and Madagascan cocoa tends to be incredibly fruity, very jammy-like, very acidic as well. But yeah, salty, brilliant. Okay, so as you've already sort of discovered, much of the flavor of your chocolate, it develops on the farm. Yeah, jammy, brilliant. Yeah, so much of the flavor of your chocolate bar, it develops on the farm. You know, it's the bean type, the terroir, the fermentation. But the first stage in which the chocolate maker can really imprint their own style is down to the roasting of the beans. And cocoa beans, they need to be roasted. So once you've roasted your cocoa beans, the next stage is then to sort of crack them down into little cocoa nibs. So on the back of your bar, there should be some cocoa nibs sprinkled on the back. So I'm just going to ask you to almost break your nails trying to pick those off. But go ahead, pick those cocoa nibs off and just chew them. Just go ahead, chew them. And those cocoa nibs, that's the essential ingredient of what chocolate is made from. So that's just pure cocoa beans sort of ground up there. As you're chewing those nibs, just think about what sensations you're getting. Maybe it's a little bit nutty-like, maybe quite intense, maybe a bit bitter there. But has anybody noticed that your mouth is becoming quite a bit dry as you're chewing that? Yep, a few nods there. Okay, so that mouth puckering, that's what's known as astringency. I'm now going to ask you to find a small square of 100% within your pack. I realize it's not going to be the one that's on the screen there. I think you'll have a small bar of Pralu, 100%. Yep, that's the one, Susan. So go ahead, try a small piece of that. Definitely do not put the whole thing in your mouth at once, especially if you've never had 100% before. And I think I can all see you drinking water here. You're definitely going to need some water after this one. So go ahead, take a small piece of this and, you know, look at your partner's faces, look at everyone else's face on the screen here. So just, you know, just suck it, let it melt. And maybe wait a couple of seconds. And your faces might start to look a little bit like this guy here. Yep. By the way, anybody trying that right now, did anybody enjoy it? Feel free to use the chat. Did anybody really enjoy that 100%?
Yeah,
I feel like no? I feel like there must be at least one person that did enjoy that.
I didn't dislike it. But...
Okay.
Very buttery. It's very rich.
It's very buttery, yeah.
I liked
Like,
it at the beginning, but then it kind of became worse.
Okay.
I had another 100% chocolate earlier today, and it's very different from this. It's much more dry, but this is very buttery, very rich.
Yes. Yeah, that is a good observation. Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, what was the other 100% that you had? If you remember.
I got that in the supermarket, and it's called Absolutely Black. It's one of the brand that you can find in Waitrose, but like I didn't look for 100%. I just wanted a dark chocolate, and I happily bought that.
You by accidentally bought the 100%.
Yeah,
Okay.
but it was okay. Extremely after you had something too sweet, and you had one bite of that, and the whole thing lifted.
Yeah. Okay, so sort of as you're sort of, I think most of you probably had that quite a very similar reaction here, but this sort of mouth puckering, so what you've just experienced there, that's what's known as astringency. So astringency, this is a trigeminal sensation. You know, it's not a taste, it's not a flavor, but it works by stopping the viscosity of your saliva, and it's all down to the tannins in the food reacting with the proteins in your saliva. And you might recognize that dry mouthfeel, you know, I don't know, maybe if you're drinking a red wine that's got quite a bit of tannins in there, or maybe if you've ever left your tea bag in your tea for a bit too long and it's weirdly drying when you go to drink it, or even cranberry juice is incredibly astringent. But this astringency is also extremely prevalent in pure cocoa. So what you've just consumed there, that's 100% cocoa, you know, that's pure cocoa beans essentially ground down. We often confuse bitterness with astringency, but that tends to be because most food and drink that we have in the West that is bitter is also astringent. But bitterness is a taste, whereas astringency is that mouth puckering sensation. Does anybody have a coffee bean to hand? I know I wrote it in the email, but I sort of never expect people to read the small print there. Yeah, fantastic. Some of you do. Brilliant. Okay, for those of you that have a coffee bean, go ahead and just chew it. And then go back to that 100% chocolate. And sort of sorry for making you go back to that 100%. But what we're essentially doing here is we're super saturating your trigeminal nerve and your sense of astringency. So when you have something astringent, our brain is pretty good at telling us, you know, wait a minute, I've had enough, I don't want any more. And I'm guessing most of you got that when you had that 100%. You definitely didn't want to go back for another piece. But if you go back if you go for another astringent product, in this case, the coffee and the chocolate, you can actually start to develop the flavors there. And this is sort of the reason as to why gin and tonics work so well together. Both incredibly astringent. When you put them together, you can start to develop all the flavors there. So Rasika, any better the second time round? It doesn't work with that.
Yeah, I think it was actually really different this time.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, but another way to knock the astringency on its head, it is to add sugar. So feel free to go back to your 63% Mena-Cal and just see what a little bit of sugar does to essentially the flavor experience. You're actually able to pick up the flavors there. You know, with that 100%, it was very difficult to pick up any flavors, but if you add a touch of sugar, you know, it opens up all the different flavors there. Okay. So I am very conscious that this isn't the milk chocolate that you actually have, but go ahead and try your milk chocolate bar. Again, the Tres Hombres chocolate makers bar. that was crafted in Amsterdam, and the beans are sort of sailed in from the Dominican Republic on a sailing ship named the Tres Hombres, hence the name. And Gavin, okay, you've got the Pump Street milk chocolate. So yeah, this is the chocolate. So I think some of you will have the Pump Street 58%. Whichever one you have, just feel free to, describe the milk chocolate that you've got. Proper milk chocolate, very nice. Okay, caramelly, spot on. So once you add your milk powder to the grinder, actually I haven't even got to that point yet, but so once you've roasted your cocoa beans, you're going to grind them, you might conch it. At this stage, if you want to make a milk chocolate, you need to add powdered milk. So whoever said caramelly, that's a real spot on word there, because when you add your milk powder to the grinder, that friction and that heat really does caramelize the milk powder, and it just gives it very fudgy texture and a very caramel flavor. So what I hope you're going to find is that milk chocolate has got a very different mouthfeel to all of the dark chocolates that you've had. It's got a very different texture, and it just tastes very creamy. Dark chocolate will never be able to replicate the creaminess that milk chocolate can. Okay.
Out of curiosity,
yeah,
with this, this tastes more like just like literal like cream, like if you were to drink double cream almost. Like, how is that different? Why is that different to like if I had a bar of Cadbury's or something? Why is this like more pure?
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. So the particular bar that you're trying, that does have more cocoa in it. So it's got both more cocoa butter and more cocoa, I'm just going to call it cocoa powder, like the brown stuff. So it's slightly more intense there. It probably has more milk powder in it as well, and probably less sugar. Whereas dairy milk, I don't know what percentage it is, but I know it's very low. And they typically are replacing the cocoa butter with palm oil. So it melts in a very different way to sort of how most of the chocolates are melting today. But I think it's also down to what milk is being used. So this particular bar, it's a Dutch milk chocolate. So I think they're sort of using local milk. I don't know if that answers your question. Sorry. Okay, so yeah. So Jasmine, the taste sperm. Oh, was that about the 100%? Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah. Then that's a good observation as well, if it tastes quite intense there. Okay, so far we've walked from every stage, essentially from tree to bar, but we haven't quite touched on the bar yet. So to turn your chocolate into a bar, it requires a process called tempering, which is all about setting the proper crystal structure within your chocolate. So a bit like still tempering, a little bit like glass tempering. And if maybe any of you watch Bake Off or you're quite familiar with chocolate in the kitchen, you've probably come across the term tempering before. So chocolate, it has 6 different types of crystal structures it could be in, but there's only one desirable one. And this is what gives chocolate its nice shiny surface, a nice smooth melt, and a good snap as well. You may have experienced chocolate being out of temper or in a slightly different crystal structure, like a non-desirable crystal structure. Have any of you maybe left your chocolate bar in the fridge one day, you go back to it and it's got this white surface and it's very brittle when you go to eat it? Yeah, that's essentially chocolate changing its crystal structure. Another example is maybe if you've left your chocolate bar in direct sunlight or maybe in your pocket, you go back to it again, it's got this white surface, but this time it's very crumbly, like completely different crystal structures. Those 2 examples of chocolate having changed its crystal structure, and they're just not desirable textures essentially. But that white stuff risen to the surface, it's completely safe to eat. That's just the cocoa butter rising to the surface. However, if it's sort of like, a bar of Cadbury's or a bar of Bourneville, that will be a mixture of palm oils and emulsifiers sort of rising to the surface. So I don't really know how safe that one is to eat. But if it's a bar of craft chocolate, that white stuff really is just the cocoa butter. It's completely safe to eat. Your best bet is probably to melt it down, use it for cooking, use it for baking, because it's not going to be a very pleasant textural experience if you just sort of chew the bar. Okay, so I think you've got one. Oh no, this is the penultimate chocolate. So go ahead, try the Una 37% cocoa butter from the Dominican Republic in the Una Valley. Another question we often get asked, is white chocolate really chocolate? And the answer is down to how is it made and what is it made from. So this particular bar that you're trying, it's just 3 simple ingredients. It's just the cocoa butter, milk powder, and raw cane sugar. You know, there's no vanilla in there masking the flavor, and cocoa butter is the first ingredient within this chocolate. And sort of another question we get asked is, you know, what makes white chocolate white, and how is white chocolate made? So essentially, when you have your cocoa bean, you can press it and it can separate out into cocoa butter and the cocoa powder. To make this white chocolate, it would essentially just be using that cocoa butter. So none of that brown powder is involved to make a white chocolate. Okay, fantastic. And maybe, did anybody not enjoy that white chocolate bar? Was it too sweet for anyone? Nope. Take that as a sign it was good. Okay, fantastic. I think you've got one final chocolate now, which is the original beans, Esmeralda's 42%. And this is cocoa coming from the Esmeralda's province in Ecuador. So you may have noticed that we are tasting quite a lot of original beans chocolate today. So we really do love working with original beans. You know, for every bar of their chocolate bought, they plant a tree in the rainforest. So they're fantastic chocolate makers, sourcing cocoa from very rare places around the world, but they're foremost a conservationist. Okay, so a very quick overview, you know, why craft chocolate? One, I hope you agree that it tastes better, or there are so many different flavors out there. Secondly, craft chocolate is definitely better for the farmers, it's better for the planet. And thirdly, craft chocolate is definitely better for you, you know, less nasty added ingredients there, and, you know, less sugar as well in craft chocolate bars. However, when I ask you to have, you know, a piece of the original beans Esmeralda's chocolate, or if I asked you to have a piece of that milk chocolate earlier, did anybody go back for another piece of it? Or did anybody just, you know, finish the bar then and there? It's a very big bar, I think, for some of you. But did anybody go back for a second piece there? Maybe some of you?
Milk one I did.
Yeah, okay. So Samuel, you have just been bliss pointed there. So milk chocolate, it's arguably one of the original bliss point foods. So bliss point, maybe not quite what you think it is, but the bliss point is essentially the amount of salt, sugar, and fat in a food which optimizes the deliciousness. So the goal is to include 2 or 3 of those nutrients at their bliss point in the food. So we as humans, we're programmed to like foods that are sweet, foods that are salty, and foods that are fatty, because we need all of those things. But we're also programmed not to eat too much sugar, not to eat too much fat, not to eat too much salt. And I feel like in isolation, you know that you can eat too much of any of those. But in nature, there's nothing that combines sugar, fat, salt all at once. However, food scientists, sort of in the hippie era, sort of 60s, 70s, particularly by a guy named Moskowitz, discovered that if you combine sugar, fat, salt, our natural ability to stop eating or wanting to eat is completely overrun. You know, combine sugar, fat, salt, you will essentially turn us into human Labradors. We cannot stop eating. So the best example of this, it's probably something like the Pringle. They have a classic slogan, once you pop, you can't stop. But another great example, actually, I think they've ditched that slogan, but another great example is a Dorito. You know, once you've had a Dorito, next thing you want is another Dorito. Once you've had a biscuit or a cookie, next thing you want is another biscuit. However, once you've had a steak, next thing you want probably isn't another steak, but you might want to lie down. But it's a classic example of sugar, fat, salt. So my best bet with all of the dark chocolate today, you're probably relatively sated. You might have been savoring the chocolate. I don't know. You might have dinner after this. But and actually, maybe if I asked you to eat a full bar of dark chocolate, you probably could, but you probably really wouldn't want to. Now, with the milk chocolate and even that Menacao salt and nibs, you may have been able to savor it, but it was probably very difficult resisting going back for another piece or just finishing the whole bar then and there. The reason being sugar, fat, salt. The Menacao salt and nibs, it's got that touch of salt there. The chocolate maker's Tres Hombres bar, that has a touch of salt in it. And this Esmeralda's 42%, it's got that touch of salt in it. So it's basically the bliss point. That's actually the closest we get to the bliss point in craft chocolate. So I would have scientifically expected you to want to finish the whole bar then and there. So that's another reason to sort of look what's going into your chocolate bars when you buy them. Okay, so as promised, we do have a very quick quiz. So whoever gets top marks, you just have to tell me which bars you enjoyed, and I will find some very similar ones in our library and send you some similar ones. So if you need the code again, it's 825 59 11 9. And the quiz is very much fastest fingers first. I think I've got most of you. Yep. Am I good to go? You have to shout. Oh, sorry. You want the code?
Yeah. Thank you.
Bear with me. 85 59 11 9. I also put it in the chat if you need. The two girls next to each other, I can't see your name, but you look quite competitive with one another. Okay, so I think, yeah, I think I've definitely got all of you now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the countdown there. So the question is, which country doesn't win any awards for its chocolate? If you see this on your chocolate bar, you know, think twice. Peru, Belgium, USA, or the UK, which is more of a marketing term, if anything. You know, it doesn't mean anything when it comes to good quality chocolate. Peru, Belgium, USA, or the UK. Yeah, well done, the majority, it was Belgium. Please treat that as a warning sign. USA, I know they've got Hershey's, but they are crafting amazing chocolate. You know, the craft chocolate revolution really did kickstart in the US, much like how the craft beer revolution did and sort of was brought over. UK, we win lots of awards. And Peru, yeah, they're fantastic cocoa growers, but also there's quite a few chocolate makers crafting in Peru as well. Question 2. What did the Aztecs not do with cocoa? So I mentioned 3 of these things. So use it as a currency, mix it with spices and drink it, smoke it, or fatten up a male warrior and then sacrifice him. Yeah, well done, majority. We have no records of them smoking cocoa. Which of the following countries grow both wine and cocoa? This is more of a geography question. So cocoa, 20 degrees above and below the equator. Wine, it's sort of 25 and 50 degrees. And the answer is definitely not France. Just sort of give you a heads up there. So New Zealand, France, Chile. Oh, well done, the 2 that put Australia. So Chile, it's a very good guess, but for cocoa, it's a bit too far south. But Australia, you've got the Daintree rainforest. You need rainforest to grow cocoa. And of course, produce amazing wine. In France, no, there are no rainforests and therefore for cocoa to grow. Which company produced the first commercial chocolate bar? The first chocolate bar for eating, 1847. It would have had that gritty texture. So up until this moment, we were just drinking chocolate. Cadbury's, Fry's, Godiva, or Hershey. Yep, well done, majority. It was Fry's over in Bristol. Godiva, nope, they don't make chocolate. They're sort of Belgian chocolatiers or Turkish owned now. Hershey, Cadbury's, they came a little bit after. Which company was instrumental in the production of the first milk chocolate bar? It's a Swiss company. Cadbury's, Côte d'Or, Mars, or Nestle? Okay, well done, those that put Nestle. Which of the following is not a taste? Which of the following is not detected on the tongue? Sweetness, umami, bitterness, or astringency? Yep, well done, the majority. Astringency is that trigeminal sensation. Sweetness and bitterness, they're both tastes, and umami, that's a taste. It's sort of the meaty, savory taste. It's sort of the Japanese translation for yumminess in food. And final question. Why is 568, your Union bar, called 568? Sits on 568 Prince Consort Road, millimeters in an Imperial Pint, 19 original staff members. Yeah, well done. Well done, majority. It's the Imperial Pint, the American liquid pint, slightly smaller. But otherwise, Muel. Congrats, you won. You have to let me know which chocolate bars you enjoyed there.
Will do.
Oh, it was Samuel. Okay, fantastic. Are you Swedish by any chance?
No, I think I was just given the flag.
So I will write to everyone after, just sort of thanking you, but do let me know which chocolate bars you enjoyed, and then I'll be able to send some out as a well done. But otherwise, a quick summary, always read the label, look at the ingredients, look at where your cocoa is coming from. If you don't see it on your bar, give the chocolate maker a quick Google. They should be incredibly transparent about where they're getting the cocoa from. So you get what you pay for with a cheap bar of chocolate, whether it's deforestation, Charles Slave Labor. 1 + 1 = more than 2. Craft chocolate, brilliant, share with a friend. So those of you that have someone in the room, no two pellets are the same. You probably noticed that you had different preferences there. Yep, so that's sort of the main thing there. Otherwise, thank you so much for sort of the team. I think it was Kriti, maybe Rosemary as well, for organizing the event. I hope you enjoyed, and if you do have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat. Otherwise, I'm conscious that maybe I've taken quite a bit of your time today. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, it was really fun.
Which was your favorite? Oh yeah, and happy birthday, Raskia. Fair trade. So there is a question that says, is fair trade a good choice? When it comes to mass-produced chocolate, sure, yeah, go for fair trade. If you've got a bar of Cadbury's Dairy Milk and a bar of commercial fair trade chocolate, you can go for the fair trade chocolate. But there's a couple of reasons that we wouldn't necessarily recommend the fair trade certification, is because fair trade, it typically works on mass balance. So to get a fair trade certification, you can essentially buy lots of bulk commodity cocoa that doesn't have the certification, and you can buy also fair trade cocoa, and you can blend it together in your chocolate and still get that certification. So it is quite it's not as transparent as it would seem there. But if you've got a bar of fair trade up against a bar of craft chocolate or whatever you've had today, always go for the craft chocolate. It sort of guarantees that those farmers are really being paid a better deal there. How does cold pressed cocoa stand in the traditional tasting world? Cocoa, it really can be cold pressed. Are you buying cold pressed cocoa powder, Chloe? More like bars, they say. Oh, like raw chocolate. Raw chocolate we're a bit funny about. So even here on the top, raw chocolate we're very skeptical about, because so for example, the 42 degrees, a lot of raw chocolate makers will say they don't go above 42 degrees, but that's impossible. Even during fermentation, the temperatures can get up to like 50, 80 degrees Celsius, and that is way beyond raw standards. Yeah, and typically even when roasting the chocolate bean of the cocoa beans, it needs to go above 42 degrees. That's even just to kill the pathogens and any bacteria in the cocoa. So we would never recommend to actually consume raw chocolate, just because there are some health implications there. What's a good replacement for cooking when using Cadbury's? Probably dark chocolate for cooking, just because it has more cocoa butter in there. We do sell cooking chocolate on our website, which is ideal for melting down because it comes in button form. I wouldn't have necessarily thought Cadbury's was too good for baking with chocolate, just because it's quite high in sugar and sort of palm oils there. So you might not get the same flavor flavor intensity. So typically dark chocolate with quite a bit of cocoa butter helps. How to develop a healthy relationship with chocolate. Well, I'm kind of hoping maybe sort of the craft chocolate you've had today, even just having little taste bars, having little pieces, you probably feel quite sated, right? With craft chocolate, you don't have to eat a whole bar. The idea of mass-produced chocolate, it really is built on that bliss point. You're meant to eat the whole bar in one sitting, and that's often why mass-produced chocolate doesn't come in resealable packaging. You're meant to eat the whole bar, whereas with craft chocolate, it's more about focus on the flavor of the cocoa. So you should be able to savor it, enjoy it. It should last you quite a while. My favorite chocolate bar. That's a good question. It kind of changes. It's kind of the next best chocolate bar that I'm trying. Like every day I'm trying new chocolate bars. We've probably tasted, about 8,000 different bars. Some we liked, most you really didn't, but probably about 5% we absolutely loved. And those are the bars that we put on our website. I'm really, probably my favorite cocoa preference tends to be Peru, and I love Peruvian chocolate makers as well. But it's always worth, if you are interested in sort of, doing your own chocolate tasting at home, buy a bunch of different bars, different cocoa origins, different chocolate makers. And it's so fun to sort of taste and contrast all the different maker styles and origins. And that's sort of why we love doing these tastings, because you're tasting so many different bars one against each other, and you can just taste how different they really are. It's a good way to refine the palate. Is there any chocolate that pairs with Marmite? Yeah, I'd almost suggest something like the Cru Virunga, the Virunga original beans that you tried, just something so chocolatey, because I know Marmite, some people make Marmite brownies, so you might want something super chocolatey there. Can you become well from eating too much craft chocolate in one sitting? So there was a question, can you become unwell if it has very high cocoa content? I feel like you'd need to eat a lot of high percent cocoa. Another common question there tends to be, will chocolate keep you up? Chocolate has very small amounts of caffeine in there, but it's not enough to keep you up, and it doesn't have the same stimulant effects there. Chocolate has the caffeine relative, which is theobromine. It has quite a buzzy feeling, but it won't keep you up like coffee does. I think for quite a few people, if, for example, you're prone to headaches or migraines with maybe red wine or too much coffee, you may feel the same if you've had too much dark chocolate. Is there a craft chocolate version of cream egg? Oh no, I wish. I really wish. We do have some craft chocolate makers making more confectionery stuff, but unfortunately we don't sell any of that on our website, which is such a shame. But I've tasted quite a lot of craft chocolate confectionery styles. Any tips for storing chocolate? Yep, I wouldn't recommend in the fridge, maybe somewhere out of direct sunlight, not in the fridge, away from anything that smells too funky. The fridge tends to have very potent smells, and it's got a lot of condensation, and cocoa butter is brilliant at sort of picking up those different aromas there. So probably keep it in an airtight container, keep it in the cupboard, maybe under your bed, absolutely anywhere. Any recommendations for hot chocolate, drinking chocolate? Yeah, if you happen to have any of your chocolates left today, why not melt them down, create a blend, add some milk, add some water there. That might be quite tasty. How to store if you live in a hot, humid countries like East Asia? Okay, in that case, yeah, I would then suggest the fridge. If you are in a very hot, humid country, the fridge is sort of acceptable there. How long would chocolate bars last if they're open? Chocolate bars, especially dark chocolate bars, they can last indefinitely. Nothing in dark chocolate can expire. Unless it's sort of a mass-produced chocolate, because sometimes in mass-produced dark chocolate, they do add some milk powder in there. So you have to be super careful with that. But with craft dark chocolate, nothing in there will expire. So it will be fine to eat, whenever. But the only issue there is then oxidization. Chocolate can quickly lose its flavor. So if you're going to keep it open, probably consume it within the next 2 to 3 days. But if you can maybe keep it in an airtight container, it would last a little bit longer there. How would you recommend resealing the bars we have tasted today? That's a good question. You could just use some tape, maybe. Sorry, that's not a very good recommendation. Do you have any spiced chocolate recommendations? Yeah, on our website, we have quite a lot of spice bars. The Taza bar that you tried today, the cacao puro round disc, their inspiration is sort of a Oaxaca in Mexico. And we're sort of their distributors here in the UK. And they have quite a few bars adding chili in their chocolate. So on our website, we do have a few chili chocolates. How should we pair acidic chocolate, leather pure was? Yeah, that's yeah. Are you thinking more in terms of alcohol or just other foods with the pairing of the acidic chocolate foods? It might be fun to pair with a cheese, maybe sort of a robust cheese. Yeah, that is a good question. Sorry, I'm not too sure about that with foods. With wine, I'm slightly more confident, but with general foods, I'm not too sure. Maybe, you know, the pure porcelano, it does actually make a very good chocolate cake. So if you melt that down, it does bring, it almost adds another sort of dimension to a chocolate cake. It can make it taste so fruity, which is fantastic to experience a chocolate cake that is so fruity. Otherwise, if it is wine or if it's maybe coffee as well, maybe go for another acidic coffee, or maybe go for more chocolatey based coffee. It's worth, you know, trying it with 2 different food items and just seeing which one you prefer, which pairing you prefer. Okay, those are some very good questions there. Do let me know if you have any other questions, but otherwise I will send you all an email. If you do have any questions after that, feel free to drop me a quick email to ask away. Otherwise, yeah, okay. Otherwise, yeah, thank you so much for Imperial College for organizing this event.
Can we all take a group photo if you have your camera on? Can Harmony, can you stop sharing screen?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize it was still. Yep, of course.
Great.
Yep, much needed serotonin. Yep, fantastic.
Chloe, can you take the photo?
Three, two, one.
Okay. Thanks everyone for joining. Hope you enjoyed today's event.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.